Welcome, everybody. Welcome to a lunchtime talk on agroforestry, a multifunctional 3D approach. And a warm welcome to our new colleague in Costa Rica, Fabricio, who's going to talk to us for about an hour. No, sorry, 40 minutes. The whole call is an hour, but the talk itself is going to be about 40 minutes. Before I introduce Fabricio properly, a little bit of housekeeping. We've got any questions, please put them in the chat in the usual way. And as I said, there will be about a 40-minute session with Fabricio, and then 20 minutes for questions after that. Okay. So Fabricio is joining us from Monteverde in Costa Rica. Well, I understand it's around 7 a.m. in the morning, and we've already discussed the relevant temperatures, 18 degrees centigrade, but he is at 4,500 feet as far as I could work out when I looked up the station. So that's very interesting. But we do have somebody on the call who's from Australia who's beating all of that with 37 degrees centigrade. Anyway, Dr. Fabricio Camacho is a forestry engineer and professor of agroforestry systems at Costa Rica's National Technical University. He is the executive director of the Tropical Agroforestry Institute, a startup located in Monteverde, Costa Rica, striving to promote the adoption of agroforestry as a tool for productive landscape restoration and biodiversity conservation within biological corridors. He has a PhD in natural sciences for development with an emphasis on agricultural production systems and a master's in environmental leadership. Fabricio facilitates educational programs for international universities and environmental organizations in Costa Rica. And you're very, very welcome, Fabricio. And now, if I may, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be part of this project, this audience. I'm very excited. And yeah, I would like to just introduce myself a little bit further of why I'm doing agroforestry. Well, I grew up basically in an agroforestry farm. It was a coffee farm, and we also had cattle, mainly beef cattle. And this was late 80s. And the government came, the Costa Rican government came and basically told our family, you need to get rid of all the trees. And basically, like a few years later, we went bankrupt. You know, like we even had to sell and move to the city. And some of my relatives stayed on the farm. And I became very angry because, you know, like I knew how it was, you know, to live within an agroforestry systems, and I knew how productive it was. And so that's why I went to school to study forestry, because like I wanted to learn more about how trees can help farmers, basically. And fast forward 25 years later, here I am, you know, promoting the adoption of agroforestry as a powerful tool for the transformation of our agricultural landscapes into productive agro ecosystems. And so I'm gonna start sharing my screen over here. So this is a silvopastoral system. I have a lot of pictures of tropical agroforestry because like that's where I focus my work. But you know, agroforestry is a worldwide, you know, movement now, and we're very excited to report, you know, that many examples of agroforestry systems are working really well. We have a lot of traditional agroforestry systems here, and when I say traditional, is because they're not necessarily practiced under the umbrella of agroforestry. Like when farmers do these kinds of, you know, arrangements that you're seeing here in the picture, where you can barely see the cattle, they're not thinking about the word agroforestry. Is what makes sense to them. You know, cattle, we have some areas in the northern part of Costa Rica near the border with Nicaragua, which is very dry. It's a dry type of environment. It's a tropical dry forest. And what makes more sense, you know, is to have shade for the cattle. And it actually, these are nitrogen fixing trees. They're in the genus Salmon. And it is actually very, very good for shade because, cattle love being underneath that shade, and you can see how the grass grow. Look at the pasture behind, that doesn't have any trees. So that's the neighbor farm. And doesn't have any trees. And so I always ask my students, if you were a cattle farmer, where would you like to have your cows, right? And so it's obvious, right? So this is the point of this lecture. It's all about knowing and understanding how agroforestry can help us, not only optimize productivity, but also generate a series of ecosystem services. Well, we know that our civilization has already crossed the global ecological boundaries. And this is because, we've promoted an economic system that doesn't respect the limits that nature, has. And so because of this, we are transforming nature at a rate that is unprecedented. And at the same time, we're jeopardizing the capacity of our generations and the future generations to be able to meet their needs. We are, in essence, borrowing, a lot of the natural resources and energy from future generations. And by doing it in such a way and in such an invasive way, unfortunately, we are undermining the processes that allow, the planet to work. And we are already seeing a lot of red flags. And one example is right behind, my house. This toad that you see here that is bright golden used to live here in Monteverde, which is an area that was deforested, pretty much like Costa Rica right now is famous for having a lot of forests and a lot of biodiversity and a lot of laws to protect this biodiversity, but it wasn't like that all the time. I mean, we actually went from having 70% forest coverage after Second World War to only 26% forest back in the 80s, mid 80s. We had the highest deforestation rate in the world, and definitely in Latin America back then. We were cutting the trees up and down here and just, making farms. And in that process, a lot of people, especially academics, realized that we were going to be in bad shape, if we kept losing all of the natural resources that we were deforesting. And in that process of deforestation, we actually, promoted a radical transformation in our ecosystems. We have 12 different types of ecosystems here in Costa Rica. And this toad lived in the cloud forest, which is essentially a rainforest up in the mountains. So it's cooler here. We do have 40-degree temperature, down in the lowlands. If I go drive 1 hour from where I am towards the Pacific, I'll encounter, temperatures similar to what you're experiencing in Australia with a high humidity too. But up here is nice and cool. And so we have a lot of endemic species that live here. And this was one of the endemic species that actually disappeared. It was, the first species extinction that was reported due to climate change. Right here where I am, the temperature has already increased 1.5 degrees Celsius. And because of that, we have new disease vectors coming from the lowlands, new species basically substituting the native species here. And this is causing, the extinction. And not only that, but also the decline of many of the organisms that live here. When I say decline, I mean the decline in populations. And this is a phenomena that's happening globally, okay? So we see in these graphs to the right of your screen that biodiversity, the size of populations of all different kinds of animals have declined, in an average of 68%. And you probably remember, many years ago, if you went for a drive, you have to stop every 2 hours or so, at least here in Costa Rica, to clean your windshield from so many different insects, right? Or I used to leave the light on, outside and come to see, later in that night, all the diversity of insects that will come to the light. And now I do that and it's, only a few bugs here and there. And so this is the product of this transformation. We're making the world, the landscapes across the planet, very comfortable for us, okay, but very uncomfortable for many other organisms. And in this process, unfortunately, we are disrupting the ecological interactions and processes that allow ecosystems to provide the services that we obtain from them, such as pollination, such as the actual controlling populations of insects, like what bats do, for instance. And so in this process, unfortunately, we are putting in danger the capacity that the most vulnerable people have to meet their needs, and also the capacity that future generations will have to meet their needs, because it's going to be warmer and more extreme and less diverse ecological system. So we need a paradigm shift. I think we know that, and then since 1990s, we have been hearing from scientists across the planet, hey guys, we need to change gears, we need to switch lanes, we need to be more responsible in the way how we are producing, our economy, we need a more conservation-oriented economy, but we have been essentially ignoring all of that. And now, we are suffering the consequences from Australia all the way to California, passing through Southeast Asia, Europe, all throughout Latin America, North America. We're seeing the effects of climate change. We're seeing the effects of this, not only climate change, I think we have a global environmental crisis. And those of us who have been working in the conservation arena, at least here in Costa Rica, we are very, very, motivated to start projects and initiatives that hopefully will, have their effect in the short term or in the midterm, because otherwise, the future generations, these kids that you see in this picture, actually are going to have a very hard time. And what right do we have, okay, to compromise their future? So one of the areas, in this process of de-learning the way how we have been interacting with our planet and using the natural resources, we need to learn to be very strategic. We have limited resources, we have limited amount of time to do this transformation, to do this restoration of our planet. And so we need to focus in areas where we can make the most impact. And definitely the way how we produce our food is a very, important area that we can tackle very quickly, but obviously with a lot of effort, because this is one of the areas, food production and the global food system is one of the areas that is really, really broken, and we need to fix. And I think in this case, we have many different types of opportunities globally as to how we can fix this problem. So in the agriculture sector, in the process of feeding the world, we are emitting 26% of greenhouse gases. We are using 50% of the world's habitable land. And in this process, we're using 70% of the global freshwater withdrawals. But we are polluting the vast majority of the ocean and fresh water. And actually, the amount of biomass that is being represented by, livestock and birds, poultry, it's, the vast majority. And so fixing this, imbalance that we have in our food system, it is a very, it's a strategy that can have a very fast and important and significant impact in the transformation of our economy and in the transformation of our, global ecological system. And the paradox is that even though we are producing enough food, we have 1/3 of the global food production actually is never consumed, is wasted. This is 1.3 billion tons of food that goes to waste. If we only took 1/4 of the food that's wasted, we could feed the 870 million people that are hungry every day. And, something that is really incredible is that 21% of all the water that is used in agriculture actually is to produce this food that it doesn't, get consumed. 19% of the fertilizer, 18% of the cropland, and 21% of the landfill volume is, this food that goes to waste. 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions goes to waste. Essentially, if we improve our distribution system, if we improve the management of our food system, we could prevent 14% of all of the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture by 2050. So what alternatives do we have? I think we have, to put it in very simple terms, we have three alternatives that are, depicted in this graph here. The first alternative that we have is, well, we continue in the same trajectory that we've had been, since the 1800s, essentially. But we know the consequences of that. We can shift to the yellow lane, essentially, which is what countries like Costa Rica has done. Like we realize, well, we're going to lose all of our natural resources, therefore we have to do something, right? And this something, the strategy here was to protect the most endangered ecosystems. And so we have now 25% of the country is protected in national parks and reserves, and like they provide, a lot of the water that we use for producing electricity. And now we are in the transformation of the of the agriculture sector, but it's really hard because we have big multinational companies here, and we have the global economic model with the business as usual model ingrained in our economy too, causing a lot of pressure and holding us from like switching to the green lane, which is, essentially what we need to do across the globe, right? So the challenge here is to produce not necessarily more food, but actually have a smarter, distribution system in less area, okay, with less resources, while protecting nature and reducing the impacts to the environment, such as the, degradation of the land, the soil, and the pollution of the water, and obviously the emissions of greenhouse gases. So that's the challenge that we have. And one thing I know, because I took my first agroforestry class back in 1998, is that, this practice, this philosophy can really help. It's not the, as we say in Spanish, the canary glue. So it's not going to be like, one tool to fix everything, but it can certainly help, especially in the areas where we have small farms, but, also in medium-sized and large farms, it also works. Like there are many examples now, for instance, in Brazil, where they are escalating, the actual agroforestry practices to, large farms, and it's working really well. You can see some of the examples in the, in the media. Like look at Fazenda do Toca, for example, in Brazil, is already, producing more, of the products that they have, including not only agricultural products, but also, the wood and the ecosystem services that are derived from this system. So agroforestry actually works at all scales, but my emphasis has been the small scale, and I know that it can really help small farmers across the globe. So what is agroforestry? Essentially, is the integration of trees and shrubs into agricultural systems with a purpose. So the trees that you see here, which is basically a species that is native to Costa Rica, is called carao or Cassia grandis, pink shower we also call it, are planted here, in a traditional agroforestry system. As I mentioned before, I show you a picture of the Samanea agroforestry system. This is the carao agroforestry system, but it's planted with a purpose, because agroforestry, it's all about integrating trees with a strategy. So we're not just letting trees grow and go wild, we are thinking about, how these trees can perform a job at the farm. And in this case, obviously, is carbon sequestration, which not a lot of farmers are interested in this topic because they're not receiving direct benefit from it, except if they have, like a carbon credit system. But definitely shade for animals, for livestock, to improve, the environment so that they have a more natural behavior. They have a more natural microclimate that enhances, like productivity at the end, because the animals are more relaxed and they are able to consume and digest, better that grass. The grass grows greener there than in the pasture in the back over there, because this is a nitrogen fixing, and it's obviously adding a lot of biomass, and there is a nutrient cycling that's happening. And that's essentially the magic of agroforestry. The vast majority of agriculture, the conventional agriculture worldwide, we are in a constant fight against nature, because it is a type of agriculture that happens in the early succession. So the way how to interpret this picture is that if you have a pasture or if you have an empty lot and you let it alone, very, very quickly it's going to be colonized by species, hopefully not invasive species, but native species, the birds, the insects, the bats are going to start bringing like seeds from other plants from nearby forests, like if you have any. And then eventually in a few years, you're going to have a whole different plant community. But it's not only what we see above ground, it's actually what happens in the soil too. There is a transformation, and this transformation, we call it secondary succession or regeneration. Okay, so the natural tendency is a natural process that if you leave nature alone, it's going to develop a system that is resilient, that is self-sufficient. And so that's the key of agroforestry. We don't work in the early stages of this secondary succession or regeneration process. We work at a later stage. We let that natural regeneration happen, and then we manage this regeneration, because instead of having not necessarily the native trees and the native plants, the native pioneers plant, like we manipulate the system and we design it in such a way so that it functions like a natural system, but actually it produces food. So instead of having like weeds, we can have nitrogen fixing plants. Instead of having like shrubs or understory trees, we can have like shade tolerant trees such as cacao, for instance, or such as coffee. And instead of having like trees that are, like maybe not necessarily have an economic value, we can incorporate trees there that produce, different products like wood or for timber or for fuel. We can manipulate the system so that it works on its own. It is basically replicating the natural processes that naturally occur in nature, but we are configuring the system in terms of like what species, in what arrangements, what distancing we are putting. And so that is the magic of agroforestry. We spend a lot of energy and time fighting the system in conventional agriculture, because conventional agriculture happened here in the very early stages of this natural succession. But we have to invest a lot of resources in maintaining, this natural evolution from happening. And so agroforestry occurs here at a later stage. And so that's the differentiating factor of agroforestry. So when we plant trees in our fields, and it could be a pasture, it could be, like a coffee farm, a cacao farm, it could be a rice field. The idea is that these trees are actually, like going to start changing the microclimatic conditions and the soil conditions too. These trees extract nutrients from the ground and bring those nutrients up to the leaves, and when there is a change in the environment, these leaves are going to drop, and then like they're going to be feeding essentially the microbes that live here. And these microbes are going to transform that organic matter into soluble compounds that are absorbed by the vegetation again. And so essentially, trees are fertilizer factories, that we can plant strategically in our fields. And if we choose the right species, that can help sequester carbon, that can help, like produce fruit that we can bring to the market, that at the end of the growing cycle, we can harvest this tree and make them into furniture or make them into, like construction materials, etc. Then we have a diversified cash flow. So that is essentially the principle of agroforestry. So it is harnessing the natural ecological processes that nature has already invented, because it's a magnificent engineering. So some of the advantages of agroforestry is that we have experiments from all over the world. And obviously, we have conferences here in Costa Rica. We had a big conference last year from the Americas, the agroforestry in the Americas. Europe also has a big conference every other year called IAgrE. In Africa, there are conferences. And so basically, the message that I keep hearing in all those conferences is that, well, this really works, and we have more than 30 years of data that shows that when we plant these trees strategically in our farm, when we choose the right arrangement, and when I mean arrangement is the distancing between the trees, and we choose the right species, and we choose the right density, and we do a very careful market study for the products, that the agroforestry systems are going to provide, it can really work. In most cases, we can see that with the right investment, okay, because agroforestry it's not magic. We have to put money forward, and make an investment to plant the trees, to let those trees grow and start producing, the benefits. And when we have the right design and management of the system, we can derive economic benefits that in a lot of cases, basically, the data shows that it can go, from 25 to 100%, in some cases even more productivity. Once we actually go through this, process of adaptation. We have to plant the trees and let them grow, okay? We have to design the system, plant the system, let the system mature, and then we're gonna start recovering the investment. And then the benefit of agroforestry is that if we continue managing the system in a proper way, we can sustain productivity throughout the time, because we don't have to depend as much from bringing external inputs to stop, the actual natural succession process or regeneration process that nature has. And so in this sense, we have examples. You can look in the literature. We have a lot of literature available. One of the best journals, for instance, is the Agroforestry Systems Journal, where many practitioners and academics, have demonstrated that when we do this careful investment design and management process, we can derive economic benefits that are above the conventional systems. And in many cases, it's not necessarily because they produce more, but they produce the same volume we have the same productivity, but the expenses, is actually less. The cost of producing those coffee beans under the shade of nitrogen fixing trees could be less because, we don't have to buy as much nitrogen. We have the trees doing the job, right? And so when we have other activities that go within, the actual system, the actual production system, such as agritourism, for instance, then we can have another line in our cash flow, okay, that can help, with the bottom line. And so that is the main approach to the economic benefits that agroforestry can have. But we also, another great advantage is market resilience, because we have a diversified cash flow. So these farmers, for instance, if a smallholder farmer from the Bribri area, his main cash crop is bananas, but he can also sell coconuts, cacao, rice, beans, and all the products that you see on their table. And so it's another very important benefit from agroforestry, that you're not putting all the eggs in one basket. You're basically distributing the eggs in many baskets. And so if there is drought, or if there is a flood, or if there is a market crash, you still have, something to bring to the market so that you don't run out of cash. From the ecological perspective, agroforestry systems provide a lot of habitat for biodiversity. So you can see the sugar cane field on the side of this experiment. This is at Atié. It is one of the main agricultural centers here in Latin America. So it's basically whatever you can find in the soil, maybe some insects, if you do a wildlife or biodiversity inventory in the sugarcane field. But if you go the cacao and mahogany agroforestry system experiment that we have here, you can find, an incredible amount of birds and mammals and bats and insects. And this is beneficial because, as I showed at the very beginning of the presentation, we have a biodiversity crisis, and so this is a biodiversity smart or friendly system that can help, increase habitat. And at the same time, a lot of this biodiversity can really help with the ecological processes and maintaining the ecological integrity and productivity in the system. Obviously, it's a climate-friendly activity, mainly because all those trees, like 60% is carbon. And so they help sequester carbon above ground and also below ground. And, we have different measures of like how much carbon can be sequestered per hectare. Obviously, it depends on the kind of system that you have and the arrangement that you have. But we have examples of like 228 tons of carbon per hectare per year. Those are very intensive systems. It can also help protect water, preserve water, because, trees intercept the rain, right? And make this rain fall like filter the soil in a very gradual way, and so the soil tends to be more aerated, more porous in the agroforestry systems, and so this can help with infiltration, and it can also help with reducing runoff. And so we've seen experiments here in Costa Rica where we have pastures versus agroforestry systems versus secondary forests, and the agroforestry system is, in terms of the water conservation benefits, it's like halfway between the pastures, for instance, and the natural forest. And obviously, help with food security and sovereignty, which is a big deal in many parts of the world. I think, and this is why my emphasis in agroforestry is essentially small-scale farmers, because as we saw in the previous picture, the indigenous people, like they have, if they can't sell their bananas to the market, they still have a lot of food to consume themselves. Actually, in fact, the vast majority of the food that they consume comes from their own farm, because they also have, poultry and livestock and fish. And so it's it's a system that can really help with food. Some of the negatives in agroforestry is the fact that it requires an investment. I already talked about this, and it requires time for the system to develop. It's a very complex system to design and to manage, because, in this case, for instance, we have cassava, we have cacao, and we have bananas. The bananas is actually a temporary shade for the cacao. Because during the initial stages of cacao growth, it requires shade. But you can also sell the bananas in the market. In this case, there are plantains, and obviously you can recover the investment of having the cacao being planted, and the cassava too can help with the recovering the initial investment. And so you're managing 3 crops instead of 1. And so obviously it's more complex, and many farmers obviously don't want that. There is also another disadvantage of agroforestry, and this is that there is lack of incentives and support from the government. And we have many different ways how we can practice agroforestry. So trees and crops, we call that system agro-silvicultural system. So in this case, we have coffee with mahogany. In this case, coffee with erythrina, which is a nitrogen-fixing tree that is, very easy to propagate. You see them in almost every coffee field now here in Costa Rica. And we have, in this case, cacao with another species of mahogany. Cacao thrives under the shade. It requires about 40% shade to thrive. And these are varieties that are now resistant to some of the pest disease trial, the same trial that I showed from the air at Cartier. And then we also can have, in this case, bananas with different kinds of native timber trees, including cordia, and including a lot of the trees in the bean family. It's a very resilient system, very productive system, very healthy system. It doesn't require, like, this is a certified organic farm, and this is in the indigenous territory as well. When we integrate trees with pastures and livestock, we call those systems silvopastoral systems. And in this case, we can have cow. This is the picture I showed at the beginning. We can have goats. This is an example of Germany. We can have chickens too, and this is a very interesting arrangement because we have these trees is for dendro energy. Okay, so like these trees are harvested at the end of summer for producing pellets to produce energy. We can have geese, we can have pigs, and you name it, And then when we have the integration of trees, crops, and livestock, okay, we call those agro-silvopastoral systems. And in this case, you don't see the chickens there, but like there's chickens. We have coffee, we have aguacate, avocado, we have bananas, we have citrus, and then obviously the farmer is in charge of managing, all those components of the system. We have other agroforestry practices that are not necessarily systems, but in this case, if you come to Costa Rica, you'll see a lot of living fences, is what makes sense. It's not necessarily an agroforestry practice per se by the farmers, but it makes sense to have these living fences because, you don't have to cut trees to make a, fence from a dead post, or you don't have to buy a post made out of concrete because obviously it is very expensive. You just plant a tree that can be propagated asexually. In this case, we have ficus here, and it's great for shade, like it provides shade to the livestock, and it also, creates habitat for wildlife. And something that we learned here in Costa Rica after establishing a lot of protected areas, in the form of national parks and reserves, is that these protected areas are, like little islands of biodiversity. And we started seeing that in some of those protected areas, the species started to become, genetically eroded because they are inbreeding. And so now we have a program here in Costa Rica called biological corridors. And the idea of a biological corridor is that we can create connectivity between those protected areas, and living fences, is one of the most important strategies that is being used to generate that connectivity, that integration of conservation areas with production areas. And so living fences is really a very important, very powerful agroforestry tool. In very windy areas, and this is the mountains where I live, like basically I'm located like right here. I don't know if you can see my mouth, but we have a lot of wind, and so when we plant rows of trees very strategically, perpendicular to the wind direction, it creates an area of actual protection where you can do a lot of farming there, because the trees, if you do it in a very strategic way, where you have different layers of trees in your windbreak, it can definitely help reduce the speed of the wind and creating a protected area on the opposite side of the windbreak. And so that's another important agroforestry practice. And it is widely used also in the temperate areas. Riparian buffers are very important too, because they help with the wildlife migration. It is a great strategy for connecting protected areas. And please remember that here in Costa Rica, ecotourism is a very important economic activity. So having this connectivity is really of national interest, because, you know, we have a lot of wildlife, we have a lot of opportunities for ecotourism in those areas. But not only that, this riparian buffers can also help filter the water that comes from the pineapple fields or sugarcane field. The runoff water is usually polluted, you know, with contaminants, with, you know, herbicides or whatnot. The riparian buffers help with the quality of this water. And it's also a great way to mitigate flooding too. And it's also habitat for biodiversity. Another practice that is widely used, especially, yes, sir.
Hi, Fabricio. Fabricio, we've got about 5 minutes left. Just to let you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm about to finish. So essentially, this system is widely used in the temperate zone, outside the tropics, but also starting to be used. It's called the alley cropping system, and it's essentially lines of trees with an alley in the middle with an area where you can plant grass or you can plant, you know, vegetables or whatever, you know, your market requires. And the advantage of this kind of system is that it allows for mechanization. So it is very popular in some other areas. We have many examples of indigenous agroforestry systems, because agroforestry is a practice that is, you know, is not new. We have the Amazonian chacra. We have the Kinsun well from Guatemala. It is practiced instead of, it's an alternative to slash and burn. We also have chamugro here in Costa Rica, which is it's actually a system that I work with a lot, because what they're trying to do is to diversify their cash crop. Essentially, instead of only having cacao and bananas, they're trying to incorporate organic pineapple in this system in the indigenous territory. Is really interesting. It's similar to the Amazonian chakra, but the Amazonian chakra actually, they rotate in different parts of the forest and they let the areas that they utilize for follow. But then at the end, this system is more permanent. We have in Mexico a lot of different kinds of system. We have milpa, we have chinampas, we have another system that is very interesting, pineapple. Is in the south of Mexico. In Europe, we have the Hesa, you know, in Spain with the beautiful Iberic pig that is, you know, the most expensive meat in the world. And we have the Argan agroforestry systems with goats in Morocco. And we have, you know, in North America, I was there on a field trip recently, and I see a lot of technology being incorporated in this case. One of the main challenges in tree recruitment is actually mortality due to mechanical damages by deer or even cattle. And so they're coming up with a system where they have like this protection tubes and they wrap them up with electric wires so that, you know, the trees have a high survival rate. Another innovation is that there are now companies that basically help you design and implement your agroforestry system. And as I mentioned, in South America, there is a lot of agroforestry following the syntropic approach, which is basically a type of alley cropping system where you have, you know, not only trees, but you also have crops on those rows that can help, you know, with the cash flow. And so in essence, we have, you know, agroforestry is a very large, you know, toolbox that you can use to transform agriculture fields into, you know, more resilient, more climate friendly, and if done right, more economically viable agro ecosystems. And so why are we not doing it? Why are we not doing it more? So we have different reasons, and one of them is because people don't know about agroforestry. There is a myth that trees, you know, compete with the crops, but that's true if you don't do it, you know, in a strategic way. But if you have, you know, proper planning, and that's what we do at agroforestry engineering, like we, you know, plan the farm very carefully. And then when you have better funding mechanisms and when you have examples where farmers can, like, you know, replicate, and when you have adoption programs, that you can definitely, you know, increase the adoption. And so this is essentially what I'm trying to do here in Costa Rica and, you know, in other countries too. But like my main emphasis is here because I feel that the country is what is ready to do So we're trying to overcome, those challenges. And so I established, with help from many, many people, it's a network of people, the Tropical Agroforestry Institute, which is essentially a startup program where we're trying to do outreach. We educate farmers on agroforestry and climate smart agriculture, and we provide small grants so that they can implement this, what they learn. And obviously funding is always, the main bottleneck. And the way how we're funding this process is with students that come to Costa Rica, or tourists that come to Costa Rica, and I offer educational programs to them in biodiversity, sustainability. I basically guide them, throughout the country in programs that last for 2 weeks, and then they help generate the resources so that we can do this outreach. And so we are in this area, and this is basically my everyday, view of this biological corridor, where we have this beautiful protected area here in top. This is where I live, Monteverde, but we have all of this deforestation. And my approach is that we can, transform a lot of this landscape back into, agriculture that makes more sense, that is more climate friendly. And in that way, I can hopefully help with the, having a better inheritance for the future generation. So I operate from this farm, it's called Linda Vista. It's part of the Institute project. And we do many activities. In this case, you can see some of the educational programs that we offer, some of the farmers training programs, and we are here to help. I know that I'm over time now, so I will stop here and welcome any questions. Thank you so much for paying attention.
You're very welcome, Fabricio. I'm glad we stayed with it. I mean, there was such a fascinating talk, really interesting. I love the way that you took us through the introduced us to the problems of inefficiency in food production, and then introduced us to agroforestry as a concept, and then talked about the design-intensive nature of agroforestry, and then finally you talked to us about your academy and the work that you're doing there. That's really fascinating. The time has gone all too quickly. We do have some questions. Sarah, are we asking, do people want to ask their own questions, or do you want me to interpret?
I think it doesn't matter either way, to be honest. It might be quicker just for you to read them out.
Okay, one particular question which actually struck me on one of your final slides that showed the deforestation around Monteverde. There was a question around illegal logging and some of it potentially legal logging, and it's from Alan actually, and it's around the evidence that agroforestry as a sort of a healing system. How does it? What evidence is there that it can actually reverse some of the soil erosion that's been caused by illegal logging that we can see there?
Yes. So basically, what happens is that when you remove the vegetation, especially here in tropical areas, okay, when you remove the vegetation and you leave the soil exposed, okay, these soils are very new, and this is a very rugged terrain. So we have a lot of mountains, and we have a lot of rain. And that is combination for disaster, because you have exposed soil, okay, that is volcanic, is very fragile, is very erodible. And then we have 3 meters of rain in a year, or you have a storm, where you can have half a meter, in a week. So that soil is going to end up in the lowlands, right? Causing a lot of sedimentation problems in the mangroves ecosystems, for example. And so agroforestry can really help, because, we are putting a Band-Aid on that, open wound, essentially. When the trees start to grow, as I mentioned earlier, they intercept the rain, okay? and they can help stop runoff because, you know, obviously the roots penetrate the soil and make it more permeable. And so when the rain falls, it's not hitting directly the soil, so the erosion power of the rain is mitigated. But then if you plant those trees, for instance, following the contour lines, okay, it's even better because there is still going to be runoff, because with agroforestry, we're not covering the entire field with trees. We want to have, like, for instance, the way how I design agroforestry systems is with the projected shade percentage, because we already have data on what amount of shade is the right amount for the type of crop that you have. Okay, so for instance, in cacao, in coffee, okay, you can have, it's ideal if you have 40% shade, okay? And so what you do is, like, we project the density of trees in the field so that when those trees grow their crown, okay, there is still 60% space for light to penetrate in the field, okay? But then if you strategically design the system, if you're in a slope, for example, and you put those trees following the contour line, these trees, the root system can also mitigate, you know, the actual erosion. And so this is how, you know, agroforestry can be very powerful, you know, to prevent erosion, to prevent runoff, and to also maximize the infiltration capacity, you know, that the soil has for the water that's available. In many cases, you know, we combine the actual, you know, tree planting, the design of the arrangement of the tree planting with other climate smart practices, okay? So we're not just focusing the agroforestry. And one of them, for instance, for water conservation and soil conservation, is to install swells in the system that can retain the water runoff, and they also actually retain the organic matter that falls in those swells, so that you can make compost out of the materials that accumulate there, and you can use this compost to spread in the fields as well. And so this is, you know, very simply how you can definitely reduce or in this case, like help restore the productivity and the quality of the soil with agroforestry. Mainly because when you're putting the trees in the field, the trees, like, are, you know, acting as agents that help restore the microbial communities. They help restore the structure of the soil so that it's more permeable, and so that there is more you know, interactions between the different components, instead of just having a monoculture that you're, you know, like, going up and down with tractors and essentially deteriorating the soil.
Thank you,
so
Fabricio.
I don't know if you answer that question.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was a very, very comprehensive answer. You started to touch on precision agroforestry, which I'm assuming has a little bit more mechanization. And we do have a question around the tension between perhaps a highly labor-intensive system and a highly mechanized system. This is from Tim, and we just wonder how compatible this tension is. Is there examples of where mechanization has actually improved agroforestry production, or does it always have to be labor intensive?
I think the tendency now, especially in temperate areas, but also in some tropical areas too, is towards mechanization. You know, even in the indigenous territories where they practice, you know, ancestral acting to bring in machines, because, like, it makes it more efficient. I think, you know, within the arena of mechanization, the best agroforestry practice that is more friendly is the alley cropping system, you know, where you have, and, you know, it's been studied, like in France, Christian Dupras brought the concept from Southeast Asia back in the 90s, you know, where they have rows of trees with, like, you know, alleys where they plant, they do the rotation, you know, with wheat and barley and many different kinds of crops, and it shows profitability. But I think it depends on the system. It will be very difficult when for instance, in a coffee field or in a cacao field with spread out trees, like the one that I showed in the picture, to have mechanization there. But if you plan it carefully, you can certainly have that. We have example, I think I mentioned it before, Fazenda do Toca in Brazil is a great example that agroforestry can be brought to the next level using, it is a fully mechanized system. Essentially, they have tractors. They are even developing machinery that's specialized for agroforestry, because they don't want to till the soil necessarily, because they don't want to disrupt the root systems of the plants that they're growing in the alleys. And so they've developed machinery that can help, like mow that grass, which is actually the fertilizer for the trees, and like it does it automatically. And so I think it is very possible. And also the way how I use not only mechanization but technology, is very important. I think like we have to learn how to integrate the traditional knowledge that we have from agroforestry and the benefits with the modern knowledge. And now we have LiDAR, and now we have photogrammetry. And these are very, very powerful tools that can help us design our agroforestry systems very, very efficiently. So now, for instance, like instead of like me like hiring a crew of students to go measure like the shade percentage that we have in a specific field, I just send my drone and like just do it, from the computer. I calculate the shade percentage, and I can project how much shade the system is going to have. So this integration is very, very important.
Yeah, these are really interesting dimensions. We've got time, I think, for probably one more question from Chris, and this is really about whether you're always working with indigenous crops, or are you introducing potentially foreign crop types to the system? And if so, is there a sort of a knock-on effect, a consequential effect on the natural ecosystem by bringing in what might be improved varieties or different varieties of crops that are not native to the area?
Mm-hmm. Well, my experience with that is mainly in the indigenous territory. And so the reasoning behind is because, the main cash crop from the indigenous people that I work with, and it's an association of 250 small farmers, okay? And they are in an indigenous territory in the southern part of Costa Rica, near the Panama border. And they have an association that produces organic banana, and they sell it to a company for making a baby food, organic baby food, basically. But there is a new threat that they have for the bananas, because it's called Fusarium R4, and it's already in Panama and Colombia. Okay, so they are very, very nervous that this will come and like, affect their banana fields. And so they're looking to diversify their cash crop by incorporating pineapple. Their idea is that they don't want the conventional MD2 pineapple that Dole produces. They actually have a native variety called Montelirio. And so they're experimenting with Montelirio variety, and then now they're starting to propagate to make, to have enough propagation material. So I think that it depends, my approach is, yes, let's bring technology, let's bring, mechanization, let's make the system more efficient, but let's not make the same mistakes that we made with conventional agriculture. I think that there needs to be a balance, but at the end, that balance is going to be dictated by the farm, the characteristics of the farm, the market, okay, and also, the objectives of the farmer. So every project is very, very specific. You know, I work with farmers that are more like, oh, we want the mechanization, we want all the technology and like drip irrigation and all the precision agriculture because they have that mentality. Well, we adapt to that mentality, right? But we try to incorporate some of the natural principles. But then we have the other extreme of the spectrum, you know, which is the farmers that want to keep it, you know, more organic, more, you know, traditional. And so we adapt to that. So we have to read the market and read the client in a way so that we can provide a solution that's adapted to the worldview, because at the end is very important. But definitely, you know, bringing genetically improved system, I mean, modify organisms, like we have to be very careful with that, especially in the areas that are more indigenous, that are more on the traditional way of doing things. So we have to read it case by case.
The people that have asked questions. Oh, there's a question about funding mechanisms. And I guess one question that was passing my mind was about land ownership, land tenure, and the relationship between government support in Costa Rica, and whether that is an important part of getting these systems adopted.
Definitely. I mean, without funding, we can't do agroforestry. In Costa Rica, we have since 1996, we have a system that is called Payment for Ecosystem Services, and it basically it has different modalities, and one of the modalities is agroforestry, but it's hardly used. What the law says is that if you have a farm and you have trees on that farm, or you want to put trees on that farm with an agroforestry arrangement, they pay for the tree basically, and they give you a little bit of money and a tax credit so that you can maintain the tree for about 3 years. Okay. So in a way, there is an incentive, but one of the problems is that most people don't know. Most foresters don't know about this incentive, and you know, it's hardly used. Like when I speak with the authorities here, it's hardly used, and the main reason is due to lack of knowledge of the program or the possibility to access that resource, and also because you got to have a management plan, okay? And in order to have a management plan, you have to hire a forester to do the management plan for the agroforestry system. And as I said, many foresters have only taken a class in agroforestry and they don't necessarily care or know. The main way how this fund is used, the Payment for Ecosystem Services, which is fed from tax that comes from fossil fuels, by the way, is for conservation. So you have a forest that's protected, and then like that forest is sequestering carbon, is providing ecosystem services. So you get paid a certain amount per year, which is $64 per hectare per year, US dollars. And that's a 5-year contract. So that's like the most conventional use of this fund. But other than that, like, you know, it's got to come from somewhere, you know, and that somewhere has, in many cases, farmers want to put the trees on their farms, especially for water conservation, but they don't want to pay for those trees. And so that is the main bottleneck. And I guess on the Payment for Ecosystem Services pocket or you know, source of money is there, but a lot of people don't know about it. And so that's one of my jobs, you know, is to train foresters, train people, and let them know, you know, where is the money to do this. So that's part of the work that we're trying to do here at the East.
That's great. Thank you, Fabricio. I think with that final summation, we should probably draw the session to a close now. It's 4 minutes past 4. Sorry, 4 minutes past 2 our time here, Sarah. And I guess some people may need to get their lunch, and Fabricio may need to get his breakfast, because it is quite early in the morning there. It's been an absolutely fascinating talk. I mean, there were so many angles to it, and such wonderful illustrations. Thank you ever so much for that.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.